The Vanguard cut through the darkness of space, its battered hull streaked with scars from countless skirmishes. Elijah Drake stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the star streaks outside the viewport. The vastness of space had always been awe-inspiring, but today it felt suffocating, like a vast, empty void closing in around her. Her crew, worn and weary, moved silently around the room, their eyes hollow from the years of constant conflict. Every face reflected the same thought. How much longer could they hold on? "Captain," Lieutenant Rowe's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We've decrypted the distress signal. It's human, and it's coming from deep within the Forsaken Realm." The Forsaken Realm, a region of space once home to thriving colonies, now abandoned and forgotten, a domain ruled by the alien empire that had swept through human space like a plague. It was a place that no one dared enter, too far from Earth, too dangerous, too isolated. The thought of finding survivors there seemed impossible. But Elijah's instincts told her this was no coincidence. "Could it be a trap?" she asked, turning to face Rowe. Her voice was calm, but her heart raced with the weight of the decision. "I can't say for sure," Rowe replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But the signal's origin matches no known alien outposts. It's human, Captain. It's our people." Elijah's mind raced. She had heard the rumors of lost colonies, whispers of pockets of humanity hiding in the far reaches of space, but she had never dared hope that they could still be alive. If there were survivors, this could be their salvation. If there were survivors, Earth still had a chance. "We're going," Elijah said, her voice firm. "Set a course for the Forsaken Realm. Full speed ahead." As Rowe confirmed the orders, Elijah turned to face her crew. Every soul on this ship had given everything. The Vanguard was the last of Earth's fleet, and it had fought in battle after battle, losing comrades with each engagement. Yet, against all odds, it had survived. Her crew had survived. She had survived. And she would not let their sacrifices be in vain. "We are humanity's last hope," Elijah continued, her voice rising, taking command of the room. "I know the odds. I know the risks. But this is more than just a mission. It's our future. We're going to reclaim what was stolen from us. We're going to find those survivors, and we're going to make them believe again. We will not bow to these invaders. Not today." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in what felt like years, there was a spark in her crew's eyes, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of humanity's will to survive. "Captain," Ensign Drayton spoke up, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. "The alien fleet's movements. They're closing in on the Forsaken Realm. We might not have much time." Elijah's gaze sharpened. The alien empire was not only ruthless, but cunning. If they were moving toward the Forsaken Realm, they knew something important. It would not be long before they noticed the Vanguard's approach. "We don't have a choice," Elijah said, her voice ice-cold with determination. "Rowe, plot the fastest course. We'll outrun them. Drayton, get me a full scan of the region. We need to know everything." The ship groaned as it adjusted its course, pushing the remaining power reserves to their limits. Outside the viewport, the stars seemed to stretch as the ship entered hyperdrive. Elijah stood still, her mind racing. The galaxy was vast, and their time was limited. The alien fleet had already claimed too much of humanity's future. Earth's fallen cities, once beacons of civilization, now lay in ruins. But the survivors in the Forsaken Realm might hold the key to their salvation. But what would they find there? Friends or foes? She knew the stakes. If the aliens were heading to the Forsaken Realm, they had found something. And whatever it was, it couldn't be good for humanity. The Vanguard tore through the endless void, the hum of its engines vibrating through the metal hull. As the ship approached the edge of the Forsaken Realm, the stars ahead began to grow dimmer, obscured by the thick nebula and the remnants of long-forgotten human colonies that littered the region. It was a desolate stretch of space, a place where even the bravest had once feared to venture. The debris fields were scattered like forgotten bones, and the ruins of distant colonies seemed to whisper of lives lost in battles fought. "Captain," Lieutenant Rowe's voice broke the silence, drawing Alicia from her thoughts. "We're entering the outermost reaches of the Forsaken Realm. No sign of the alien fleet yet, but their sensors are likely sweeping the area. We'll need to move fast." Alicia nodded, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the holographic map that flickered in front of her. The distress signal was coming from a colony deep within the realm, far from the known human territories. It was almost as if it had been deliberately hidden from view, tucked away behind layers of dead space. "Any indication of what's there?" Alicia asked, her tone sharp with focus. "We've been able to trace the signal to an old colony," Drayton, the ship's communications officer, answered. "It's not on any official maps. It seems abandoned, but the signal is still active, which is strange." "Strange is right," Alicia murmured under her breath. "Keep a close watch. I don't like this." As they pushed deeper into the Forsaken Realm, the atmosphere on the bridge grew tense. Alicia could feel the unease in the air, the sense of something waiting just out of sight. Her crew was restless, their faces a mirror of her own thoughts. What had happened to this colony? And why was a distress beacon still broadcasting after so many years? "Captain, we're coming up on the colony's location," Rowe reported, pulling Alicia from her reverie. "But there's something you need to see." The main view screen shifted, revealing the shattered, desolate world. The colony itself, once a thriving bastion of humanity, was now little more than a graveyard. Skyscrapers were half collapsed, their foundations cracked. Massive craters marred the surface, remnants of long-forgotten bombardments. Only a handful of structures remained standing, cloaked in the dust of centuries. "What happened here?" Alicia whispered, a chill creeping down her spine. "We're not sure," Rowe said, his voice tight. "But there's something unusual about the energy signature we're picking up from the colony's central hub. It doesn't match anything from the old human archives." Alicia's gut twisted. She knew the implications of that. The Forsaken Realm had been left behind, a lost corner of the galaxy that no one cared to explore. Yet this signal, this strange energy, was unmistakable. It was calling to them. But who, or what, was still here to answer? "Prepare for an orbital scan," Alicia ordered, her voice tight. "I want to know exactly what we're walking into." The Vanguard dropped out of hyperdrive, its engines screaming in protest as they decelerated toward the dead planet. The sensors swept the surface, revealing even more unsettling details. Strange readings pulsed from deep within the colony's heart, emanating from an ancient structure that had somehow remained intact, its design unlike anything Alicia had ever seen. The architecture was alien, but it also bore marks of human craftsmanship, altered, twisted, and fused in ways that seemed impossible. "It's a hybrid," Drayton said in a voice full of disbelief. "This structure, it's not just human. Someone, has been modifying it." Alicia felt a knot form in her stomach. The very nature of the signal felt wrong, alien in a way that was difficult to articulate. They had come looking for survivors, but what they found was a deep, gnawing uncertainty. "Launch the drop pods," Alicia said sharply, her mind racing through the possibilities. "We're going down, and keep your eyes open for anything out of the ordinary." The Vanguard's drop pods detached with a soft hiss, spiraling toward the desolate planet below. Alicia stood at the helm of the command pod, her heart pounding as they descended into the unknown. She could feel the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. She had pushed her crew to the brink before, but this felt different. Something was wrong here. The silence from the colony was deafening, and the air in her pod seemed to grow thicker with each passing moment. "We're almost through the atmosphere," Rowe said, his voice tense. "Brace yourselves." The pod shuddered as it broke through the planet's thick cloud cover. Below, the colony stretched out like a labyrinth of ruins, the skeletal remains of humanity's ambition. As they touched down near the central hub, Alicia's gaze never wavered. She had come here to find survivors. But now, with the strange energy readings still pulsing from deep within the planet, she feared that whatever had survived here might be far worse than the aliens they had fought. The drop pod settled with a heavy thud against the cracked earth, sending plumes of dust into the air. Alicia's boots hit the surface first, the ground rough beneath her feet as she stepped out into the barren landscape. The colony, once a symbol of human expansion, now felt like a tomb. The towering skeletal remains of buildings loomed overhead, casting long, eerie shadows in the dim light. "Stay sharp," Alicia commanded, her voice low but firm. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in every detail. There was an unsettling silence here, broken only by the occasional hum of distant machinery. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. Something was watching them. The crew disembarked from the other pods, weapons in hand, scanning their surroundings with the same unease that Alicia felt in her gut. Lieutenant Rowe moved up beside her, his eyes narrowed as he surveyed the landscape. "Captain, I'm not getting any life signs from this area. Just the energy readings from the central hub. It's strange. Too controlled. It doesn't feel natural." Alicia nodded. The signal had led them here, but it wasn't just the distress call they had been tracking. It was the strange energy signature that made her skin crawl. It wasn't like anything they had encountered before. Something, or someone, was manipulating the very fabric of this place. She motioned for Rowe to lead the way as they made their way toward the central hub, a towering structure in the distance that seemed to pulse with an unnatural glow. As they moved through the ruins, the air grew colder, and the oppressive silence deepened. The walls of the buildings were covered in strange symbols, alien markings that Alicia couldn't decipher. Her fingers brushed against one of the walls, the stone cold to the touch. She pulled her hand back quickly. The marks weren't just carved. They were burned into the surface, like something had been seared into the very fabric of the colony. "Captain," Drayton's voice crackled over the comms, pulling her from her thoughts. "I've been scanning the colony's data logs. It's not just the energy we're detecting. There's a history here. The last records show an experimental project, something they were working on before the colony went dark." "Tell me more," Alicia said, her tone sharp. "It's a human-alien hybrid project," Drayton replied. "The colony was abandoned after the project was deemed a failure. But the records indicate they didn't abandon it entirely. It's possible the survivors here, if they're even human, are part of the experiment." Alicia's heart sank. The hybrid project was a legend, a terrifying tale whispered among the survivors. Human-alien hybrids, created in secret, twisted into something else. She had heard the rumors, but this was no longer a myth. The truth was here, in the ruins, and she was walking straight into the heart of it. "Captain," Rowe said suddenly, his voice tight with caution, "I'm picking up movement ahead. It's too organized to be wildlife. Stay alert." The hairs on the back of Alicia's neck stood on end. This wasn't wildlife. She had heard nothing, felt nothing, but instinct told her otherwise. She signaled for the squad to fall into formation, their weapons raised as they advanced toward the glowing structure in the distance. The air around them thickened as they neared the entrance. The door to the central hub was half open, as if waiting for them. A low, vibrating hum echoed from within, reverberating through the walls. It was almost as if the building itself was alive, pulsing with energy, breathing. Alicia stepped forward, her breath shallow. She had led her crew through hell, but this felt different. This was no ordinary enemy. The aliens they had fought before were ruthless, brutal, but this was something far darker, something that could change the very nature of what it meant to be human. "On me," Alicia ordered. She stepped inside, her weapon raised, followed closely by her crew. The air inside was thick with the smell of old machinery, burnt metal, and something else, something faintly organic. The central chamber was vast, its walls lined with strange consoles and holographic displays, all flickering to life as they entered. In the center of the room stood a massive structure, a pulsating mass of cables, metal, and what appeared to be living tissue. It glowed faintly, casting a sickly green light over everything. This was no ordinary research facility. This was a temple to something ancient and horrifying. "Captain, look at this," Drayton called out from across the room, his voice shaky. He pointed to a series of containment cells along the far wall. Inside, humanoid figures, human but not quite, lay motionless in tanks, their bodies twisted, scared, and altered. Some were still alive, their eyes barely open, flickering with faint alien energy. Lysia's heart pounded in her chest. The hybrids, they were real. And they were still here. "We need to get out of here," Ro muttered, his voice tight with fear. "This place isn't just abandoned. It's a prison." Alicia's mind raced, her fingers tightening around her weapon. The signal had led them here. But now, in this twisted chamber, she realized that they had made a terrible mistake. The survivors they had hoped to find might not be human at all. And if the hybrid experiments were still active, they were far from the only danger. "Prepare for extraction," Alicia ordered, her voice cold. "We're getting out of here, but we need answers. Now." As the team began to move toward the exit, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The hum of the chamber grew louder, and the lights flickered as the air itself seemed to pulse with power. Alicia's heart raced. Something was waking up, and they weren't alone anymore. The ground beneath their boots trembled, sending a ripple of panic through Alicia's crew. The lights in the central chamber flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. The humming, low and throbbing like the pulse of some monstrous heart, seemed to intensify, vibrating through the air. Every instinct Alicia had screamed at her to run, but she couldn't. Not yet. She needed answers, needed to understand what had brought them here, and what kind of nightmare they had unleashed. "Move," she ordered, her voice a sharp command cutting through the rising tension. Her crew, already on edge, snapped into action, their weapons raised, scanning every corner of the room. As they reached the exit, Alicia couldn't help but glance back at the containment tanks. The twisted, half-human figures inside were stirring. The barely perceptible movement sent a chill down her spine. They were alive, but were they still human? A loud clang echoed from behind them, followed by a deep mechanical whir. Alicia's heart skipped a beat as the massive door that had once seemed like an entrance slammed shut with a force that rattled the whole structure. The faintest of hissing sounds reached her ears, followed by the unmistakable grinding of metal. "They're locking us in," Lieutenant Rowe shouted, his voice rising in urgency. "We're trapped." "Get ready," Alicia said, steeling herself. "We need to find another way out. Now." The central chamber was now completely sealed, and the last light of the outside world faded as the door's automated system activated. The room's ambient glow shifted, the soft green light intensifying, as if something was feeding off the energy. In the center of the chamber, the massive hybrid structure began to shift, groaning as if coming to life. "Captain, the structure." Drayton's voice trembled as he pointed. It's opening." The pulsing mass of cables, metal, and flesh split apart, revealing what had been hidden beneath, a towering figure. It was humanoid, but grotesquely mutated. Its skin was a sickly, translucent gray, revealing veins and artificial enhancements running across its form, like some kind of horrific blueprint. The thing was a twisted fusion of human and alien anatomy, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, flickering with malice. It stood, towering over them, its body emitting a low mechanical growl. Alicia's pulse quickened. "Weapons free," she barked. The crew immediately opened fire, blinding flashes of light illuminating the room as their weapons ripped into the creature's form. But the bullets did little more than cause the hybrid to stumble. Its skin seemed almost impervious to their firepower. Instead, it retaliated with terrifying speed, charging toward them with a violent screech, its arms extending into unnatural angles as it lashed out. Alicia dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a sweep of the creature's massive arm. Her heart raced as she rolled to her feet, her mind racing to formulate a plan. The hybrid was fast, stronger than anything they had ever faced, and seemingly impervious to conventional weaponry. "Row!" she shouted, ducking behind a column. "Any weaknesses?" Row started, his voice tight with disbelief. "I don't know, Captain. It's like the thing's fused with the building itself." A loud crash interrupted them as one of the hybrid's limbs tore through a nearby console, sending sparks flying. Drayton's voice came over the comms again, more frantic this time. "Captain, the energy source. It's not just feeding this creature. It's also powering up the entire colony. Whatever this thing is, it's controlling the whole facility." Alicia's blood ran cold. The creature wasn't just a weapon. It was the center of this nightmare. And if it fully activated, they would be trapped here forever. "Drayton, get to the central control room," Alicia ordered, scanning the chaos around her. "Override the system. Cut the power to that thing." "I'm on it," Drayton responded, his voice filled with determination. Meanwhile, Rowe and the rest of the crew continued to fire at the hybrid, but it was like shooting at a wall. The creature seemed to regenerate with each hit, its body warping and twisting as it absorbed the energy of the attacks. Alicia's mind raced. There had to be a weak spot, something that could bring it down. The hybrid's movements were unnaturally fluid, its body morphing with the environment around it. It wasn't just an experiment. It was a living weapon, a fusion of biology and technology, created for a purpose she couldn't yet comprehend. "Captain," Rowe yelled, ducking as the hybrid lunged toward him. "It's adapting. It's learning from our attacks. Keep firing," Alicia ordered, her voice hard as steel. She was running out of options. Then something caught her eye. The creature's eyes, glowing like the heart of a storm, flickered, almost as if they were communicating with the central core. "Drayton," she shouted into her comm. "Override the system now. Disrupt the energy flow. Target the core, not the hybrid." There was a brief pause before Drayton's voice came through. "I'm trying to access the mainframe. It's a mess, Captain. There's a backdoor I can try, but it'll take a few seconds." Seconds. They didn't have seconds. The hybrid snarled again, slamming its body into a support beam, causing the entire room to shake violently. Alicia gritted her teeth. They couldn't hold out much longer. "Just a little longer, Drayton," she muttered, more to herself than to her crew. "Please." The hybrid's glowing eyes fixed on her. Alicia stood tall, her weapon steady in her hands. She wasn't going to die here. Not today. Not with Earth's future hanging in the balance. The hybrid's glowing eyes locked onto Alicia, its predatory gaze narrowing with an almost unsettling intelligence. It began to move toward her with a slow, deliberate pace, its every step sending tremors through the floor. The crew's efforts to fend it off were growing more desperate, their weapons discharging relentlessly, but the creature seemed to absorb the energy with unnerving efficiency, its body pulsating with a sickly green glow. "Drayton," Alicia shouted again, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Her heart raced as the hybrid stalked toward her, its movements fluid, like a serpent preparing to strike. "I'm trying. Just hold on." Drayton's voice crackled over the comms, tinged with frustration and fear. There was a brief pause before he added, "The back door's not easy to access. If I can't disrupt the core in time." "We don't have time," Alicia snapped, her pulse hammering in her throat. "It's adapting to our weapons. We need to shut it down now." Without waiting for a response, Alicia charged toward the hybrid, dodging its massive arms as it swung at her. The creature's limbs were far too long, its reach extending in unnatural angles that defied everything she had learned about anatomy. It was as if the hybrid was a grotesque reflection of both human and alien forms, a nightmare made flesh. Her fingers gripped the energy pistol tightly as she fired at its head. The blast should have been enough to disable it, but it seemed to barely flinch. The energy passed through its translucent skin, only to be absorbed into its body, making the creature more powerful with each attack. "Captain, don't," Ro yelled, his voice strained as he fired another round, only to watch it dissipate harmlessly. "It's learning from us. We're just making it stronger." Alicia's heart sank as the hybrid's eyes glowed brighter, its body shifting and regenerating faster than before. The thing was feeding off the very energy they were attacking it with. They were outmatched, outclassed. "Drayton, now!" Alicia barked again, desperation rising in her chest. There was a loud crackle, and for a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Alicia's eyes widened as Drayton's voice came through, steady despite the chaos. "I've accessed the central control system. I'm sending the shutdown signal to the core now." A deep rumbling echoed from within the walls. The hybrid paused, its eyes flickering as if registering the shift in energy. The room grew darker as the artificial glow of the central core began to fade, its humming power slowly dissipating. Alicia felt a glimmer of hope surge in her chest. Could they have done it? Was it over? But the hybrid, sensing the change, let out a guttural, unearthly growl. Its body began to twitch violently as the glow in its eyes flared with renewed intensity. It was no longer just a weapon. It was fighting for survival. The ground shook harder as the walls around them groaned, as if the entire structure was rejecting the shutdown. "It's not working." Drayton's voice was frantic. "The system's rejecting the command. The core's more integrated than I thought. Like it's alive." The hybrid roared, a sound that reverberated through the chamber, and in that instant, Alicia knew they were no longer just fighting a creature. They were fighting a system, an entire sentient construct, one that had been built to endure, to evolve, and to conquer. The core wasn't merely a power source. It was a living entity, and its power was now directly feeding the hybrid. It was becoming something else entirely, something far worse. "No." Alicia gritted her teeth and spun around, looking for any kind of opening. "Ro, cover me." Before Ro could react, the hybrid lunged, its clawed hand slashing through the air, narrowly missing Alicia. She dove to the side, rolling across the floor, and quickly scrambled to her feet. The creature's roar echoed through the room, a sound of rage and defiance. It wasn't just defending itself, it was adapting faster than they could fight it. The walls began to tremble again, and Alicia felt the temperature in the room spike as the hybrid's body absorbed more energy from the failing core. The hybrid's grotesque form expanded, its skin rippling as though new layers of muscle and bone were being added with each passing second. It was transforming into something even more monstrous, something unrecognizable. "There's no way out," Ro shouted. "Captain, we're running out of time." Alicia's thoughts raced. If the core was indeed rejecting the shutdown, and the hybrid was drawing from it, there was only one way to stop it. They needed to destroy the heart of the system, the hybrid's power source itself. "Drayton," Alicia shouted over the comms, her voice rising in urgency. "You need to override the core manually. Cut its connection to the hybrid. Get to the central console." "I'm trying," Drayton replied, his voice strained. "But the system is almost fully integrated with it. It's like the hybrid is controlling the core now." Alicia's mind raced as she calculated their dwindling options. They couldn't stop the hybrid from here, but they could still disable the core. And if they couldn't do it remotely, they'd have to do it the old-fashioned way. "Row with me," she snapped. "We're going after the core, no matter what. The rest of you, keep that thing distracted." Alicia's eyes locked onto the central console, now illuminated by the pulsating glow of the hybrid's form. The clock was ticking. It was now or never. Alicia's pulse raced as she sprinted toward the central console, the hybrid's guttural growls echoing behind her. Her eyes were fixed on the illuminated control panel, its pulsating glow synchronized with the monstrous creature's movements. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They were running out of time, and the hybrid was becoming more powerful with every second. "Row," Alicia shouted, her voice strained with urgency. "We have to shut it down. Keep it distracted." Row's voice crackled through her comms. "I'm right behind you, Captain, but we won't last much longer. It's learning from every move we make. Alicia glanced over her shoulder as the hybrid recoiled from another blast of fire from the crew. It barely seemed to flinch anymore. Its limbs were transforming, twisting, as if the creature was becoming something far beyond its original design. The air around her was thick with tension as she reached the control console. The interface flickered, the holographic screens winking in and out of existence as the system fought to stay active. The core was alive, and it wasn't just resisting the shutdown. It was retaliating, pushing back with everything it had. Drayton, Alicia barked into the comms. Override the system manually. Cut the connection between the hybrid and the core. Now. A frantic, disembodied voice crackled through her earpiece. I'm trying, Captain. I've almost got it. Just need a few more seconds. Seconds. They didn't have seconds. The hybrid was charging toward them again, its glowing eyes filled with an unholy rage. It was no longer just a mutated experiment. It had become something far worse. A living embodiment of the colony's twisted ambitions. Its claws slashed through the air, narrowly missing Alicia's team as they scrambled to keep their distance. Alicia's fingers flew across the console's interface, inputting commands as quickly as she could. The system fought back, sending jolts of energy through the panel, sparks flying as the alien tech tried to reclaim control. The hybrid was almost upon them, its screech vibrating the air. Get down, Rose shouted, grabbing Alicia by the shoulder and pulling her aside just as the hybrid's claws tore through the console, sending a shower of sparks flying. The entire chamber seemed to tremble in response, and Alicia felt the entire structure begin to shift beneath them. Captain, Drayton's voice was strained but determined. I've bypassed the core's defenses. I'm cutting the power to the hybrid now. Hold on. The air seemed to grow heavier, the pulse of energy around them intensifying. Alicia's eyes locked onto the central control panel. This was their last shot. If Drayton succeeded, they could break the hybrid's connection to the core. But if not, they would all be trapped, consumed by the very thing they had come to stop. With a final, frantic keystroke, Alicia slammed her palm onto the console's surface. A massive surge of power erupted from the panel, and for a moment, everything went still. The room grew dark as the glow from the hybrid began to fade. The hybrid let out a howl of rage, a sound so primal and filled with pain that it reverberated throughout the entire structure. Its body twisted violently, its skin seething as if rejecting the power now being stripped from it. No, it screeched, its voice an unearthly blend of human and alien tones. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the hybrid collapsed to the ground, twitching violently before falling still. Its glowing eyes dimmed, its body deflating as the last of its life force was drained. Alicia stood frozen, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. For a moment, there was only silence. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, and the tremors that had been shaking the walls ceased. They had done it. The hybrid was down. But at what cost? Captain, Rose's voice was hoarse as he slowly approached, keeping his weapon raised, just in case. We did it, but it cost us. Alicia's gaze was fixed on the fallen creature. Despite their victory, her heart felt heavy. They had destroyed the hybrid, but the truth was clear. This wasn't just one failed experiment. It was a sign of something far larger. The colony had been twisted beyond recognition, its creators lost to the horrors they had unleashed. I know, Alicia muttered, her voice tight. But we still have to finish what we started. Drayton's voice came through the comms once again. Captain, I've overridden the shutdown sequence. The core is offline. The hybrid is cut off from the energy source, but there's something you need to see. Alicia's heart skipped a beat. What is it, Drayton? There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable silence, before Drayton responded. The core, it wasn't just a power source. It was a beacon. Alicia frowned. A beacon? For what? Not just for the hybrid, Drayton replied. For something else. Something far worse. The signal, It's still active, and it's reaching out. Alicia's stomach dropped. They weren't just fighting against what they could see. There was something more, something far more dangerous that had been awakened by their actions. And it was coming. "We need to move," Alicia said, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. "Now, everyone, back to the drop zone. We've got a new threat, and this time, we don't know what we're up against." As they made their way back toward the drop zone, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the chamber. Alicia's thoughts raced. The battle was far from over. They had barely scratched the surface of the nightmare that awaited them. The real fight had just begun. Alicia's heart hammered in her chest as she sprinted down the dimly lit corridor, the distant rumble of explosions echoing through the facility. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the walls groaned as if the very structure was alive, fighting against its own destruction. Drayton's warning echoed in her mind. The signal's still active. It's reaching out. What was it reaching for? What else had they inadvertently awakened? And most pressing of all, how could they stop it? "Captain, we've got company." Rose's voice crackled through the comms, his tone grim. Alicia didn't need to ask what kind of company. They had barely survived the hybrid. Whatever else was out there now, it would be worse. And they had no idea how to stop it. "Keep moving," Alicia barked, her voice sharp with authority. "To the drop zone. Now." She pushed herself harder, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she led the way. The others followed, their footsteps pounding in unison, but Alicia knew they wouldn't make it far if the facility's internal systems had fully activated. They were running out of time. The sudden sound of screeching metal reverberated through the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. Alicia didn't dare look back. She could feel the tension rising in her gut as the creature, or creatures, closed in on them. "Captain." Drayton's voice came through again, more urgent now. "The signal's not just a beacon. It's a transmitter. It's calling something to this location. I don't know what, but we're not alone. We never were." Her blood ran cold. Something else. "Get to the escape pods." Alicia snapped, not waiting for further explanation. She didn't need to know what was coming. She only needed to get them out alive. The air grew thick with tension as the group reached the entrance to the drop zone. The large reinforced door was still shut, but Alicia could hear the distinct hum of power building up behind it. She slapped the access panel, her fingers shaking from both the physical exertion and the dread gnawing at her insides. Come on," she muttered under her breath as she waited for the system to respond. The door finally slid open with a grinding noise, revealing a vast, open space. The drop zone. In the distance, the sleek escape pods were lined up, waiting for launch. But Alicia's heart sank as she noticed something else. The pods were surrounded. Massive, hulking shapes, dark silhouettes looming in the shadows, were moving toward the entrance of the drop zone. Their forms were vaguely humanoid, but their movements were jerky and unnatural, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. They were too fast, too numerous, and their eyes, glowing faintly, followed Alicia with an unsettling intelligence. "Captain, we're not going to make it," Lieutenant Rose said grimly, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't say that," Alicia snapped, trying to ignore the growing pit of fear in her stomach. "We're getting out of here. Focus on the pods." Ro nodded, though Alicia could see the fear in his eyes. The creatures were closing in, their distorted forms filling the room with an oppressive sense of dread. "Drayton," Alicia shouted, turning toward her comms. "We need a way out. Now." "I'm working on it, Captain," Drayton's voice came through, the static in his transmission a sign of the system's instability. "But the signal, it's getting stronger. Whatever's coming, it's going to be here any second." As if on cue, one of the creatures lunged forward, its glowing eyes flashing with unnatural speed. It swiped at Ro, its claw-like hands grazing the lieutenant's shoulder. Ro cried out in pain, But before he could react, Alicia was on him, pulling him to safety behind a nearby pod. "Ro, stay down," Alicia ordered, her own weapon aimed at the advancing creature. But she knew it was futile. The creature's body seemed to shimmer, its form stretching and reshaping with every bullet that struck it. The more they shot, the more it seemed to absorb the energy, growing stronger with each attack. "We can't stop them." Drayton's voice was nearly lost in the calm static. They're hybridizing with the core's energy. They're evolving." Alicia's mind raced as she scanned the room. The creatures were multiplying, their forms shifting like the hybrid they'd encountered earlier. They were adapting in real time, becoming something else entirely. Each time one fell, another rose, stronger and more lethal than before. "No choice," Alicia muttered under her breath. "We have to move now." She glanced at her team. "We split up. Find a pod, launch, and get out. Ro, take Drayton. I'll cover you." A brief moment of hesitation passed before Ro nodded. "Understood." "Go," Alicia barked. The team scattered, running toward the nearest escape pods as the creatures closed in, their screeches filling the air. Alicia took her position near the entrance, keeping her weapon trained on the advancing enemies. She fired again, the shots reverberating through the large chamber, but the creatures barely flinched. Her mind raced as the creatures continued to evolve before her eyes, becoming faster, stronger, and more aggressive. Alicia knew that they couldn't keep this up forever. They were outmatched, outnumbered, and running out of time. Come on," she muttered as the countdown timer on the nearest pod began. It was too late to make it easy. Alicia's fingers tightened on her weapon, knowing that there would be no more escape without a price. She would hold the line for as long as she could. For Earth, for the crew, and for whatever was coming next. The creatures were almost upon them, their unnatural speed and strength far outmatching anything Alicia and her team had anticipated. The ground beneath her feet trembled with every step they took, the echoes of their distorted roars filling the air like an unholy symphony. She could feel the oppressive weight of the situation closing in around her, but she held her ground. Her weapon crackled with energy as she fired another volley of shots, each one piercing the air with a sharp crack. The creatures staggered, but only for a moment. They adapted too quickly, their bodies shifting and reforming, shrugging off the attacks as if they were nothing more than a nuisance. There was no stopping them. Not like this. "Captain," Ro's voice came through, desperate. "We've got to go now. The pods are prepped." Alicia's gaze flicked toward the nearest escape pod. Ro and Drayton were already in one, the hatch sealed, the pod's engines beginning to hum to life. But Alicia could see the others, more of the creatures, rushing toward the pod bay, their eyes fixed on the fleeing humans. The team had to get out, but they couldn't leave her behind. They couldn't survive this alone. "No," Alicia muttered, her voice barely audible. "Not yet." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. She couldn't let them down. Not after everything they'd fought for. If she had to sacrifice herself to give them a chance, then so be it. She turned her weapon on the advancing horde, the energy crackling at her fingertips as she prepared to make her stand. "I'm buying you time," she said, speaking into her comms, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins. "Get to the outer atmosphere. I'll hold them off." There was a long silence. Then Drayton's voice came through, filled with regret. "Captain, don't do this." "I don't have a choice," Alicia replied, her voice firm. "Now go." Without waiting for a response, Alicia sprinted toward the oncoming horde, her heart pounding in her chest. She fired as she ran, the shots lighting up the room, each one taking down one of the creatures. But more kept coming, faster and stronger than before. Alicia reached the central pillar of the drop zone, its towering structure providing a brief moment of cover. She ducked behind it, taking a moment to catch her breath, her mind racing for any possible way out. The creatures were relentless, and now they were focusing on her, their glowing eyes fixed on her with terrifying precision. They're evolving. They're adapting. A sudden realization struck her. The signal wasn't just calling for more of these creatures. It was calling for something else entirely. Something that could destroy them all. Alicia's eyes widened as the thought crystallized in her mind. The core. The signal. It's not just a beacon. It's a summoner. A summoner for their true masters. The ground shook again as the chamber's lights flickered. The signal wasn't merely drawing these creatures to them. It was summoning something far worse. Something that could end humanity for good. She gritted her teeth, her mind racing for a solution. If she couldn't stop the signal, if she couldn't sever the link between the core and the creatures, then nothing would matter. The galaxy would be theirs to consume. Without hesitation, Alicia ran toward the central control panel, her legs burning as she moved. The hatch was open, the system still weak from the previous disruption. She had one last shot. She slammed her palm against the control panel, inputting the override code Drayton had managed to decrypt earlier. The system sparked, whined, and then hummed to life. The creatures froze for a moment, as if sensing the shift in the air. But it was too late. Alicia looked up at the approaching horde, her breath steady, her resolve firm. She had one last chance to end it all. With a final command, she initiated the shutdown sequence. The core's power began to shut down, its signal faltering, its connection to the creatures severing with a violent crack. The room seemed to implode with the sudden release of energy. The creatures howled in frustration as their forms began to disintegrate, their bodies crumbling into ash as the core's energy flickered out. But just as the last of the creatures fell, the ground rumbled beneath her feet, and the walls of the facility groaned in protest. The core, however, wasn't fully dead. It had one last trick to play. A massive explosion ripped through the center of the room, sending Alicia flying backward into the wall. Her vision blurred as the world spun around her, but she managed to push herself to her feet, her body bruised and bloodied. The escape pods had launched. They were safe. Her team was safe. Alicia smiled weakly as she watched the last vestiges of the core's energy flare before it faded into nothing. The horde of creatures was gone. The signal was silenced. And with it, the galaxy was spared, for now. But as Alicia looked out toward the empty expanse of space, she knew one thing. They had only won a battle. The war was far from over. And somewhere, in the deepest corners of the galaxy, the true threat still waited.